Well, Jeff, thanks so much for making time to do this. For those who don't know, what you need to know about Jeff Klimkowski is not just that he was the CFO, he is the CFO of Dude Wipes, but that he's been preparing for this role since I think freshman year of high school when he would make his sister drive him to school so he could read the Wall Street Journal in the car, is my understanding of our previous conversations, because Jeff had his eyes set on becoming an investment banker from a wee age as a teenager, and he was able to do that. Went to Indiana University at Kelly, got a great job at Deutsche Bank, and was on his way to being a master of the universe. But having friends derailed him, and he had some childhood buddies, Sean Riley and Ryan Megan, and together they started Dude Wipes back in the day, some decade plus ago. And then at some point, Jeff was kind of put to a decision of I continue down the iBanking track to, managing director and, all of what his original childhood dream was, or do I pursue a different dream with my childhood friends? And then lo and behold, I think you made the right call. I believe you think so as well too, but you'll tell us. So that's who we have here. Dude Wipes is the category king of flushable wipes. They crossed the $200 million of gross retail revenue last year. I cannot wait to hear when they announce what they're going to do this year, because the number's up and to the right, I am sure. And they are not only saving the world one butt at a time, they are also leading the world the way in terms of how does Jeff lead the CFO in the finance function. And the finance function is probably one of the areas of the C-suite that's the most fungible. And so, Jeff, please feel free to chime in on anything about your intro that I missed or misdirected on, and tell us the CFO role it's bigger than most people think. Can you give us a little bit of light into that?
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks for having me here. This is awesome. I would love to share this stuff with you all. So yeah, I would say that sums it up. Pretty cool intro. Definitely twists and turns in my career on how I ended up at Dude Wipes. It's funny, you think you're doing one thing and then you get there and, I got that Deutsche Bank investment banking job. Very happy there, met a lot of great people, but sometimes the universe has different ideas for you. So I do think I made the right decision leaving that job, but that's not to say there wasn't any friction or heartburn over doing it, because I really enjoyed the people that I interacted with and worked with. So a lot of smart people working real hard, and that was pretty cool. But what I would say on the CFO role, I do think it's kind of one of the most misunderstood roles within the C-suite. I would say there's 4 real kind of like verticals that report up at Dude Wipes to the CFO. The first one is everybody gets it. It's the finance and accounting function. So you have to have a good accounting function because you got to report accurate historicals. Lenders use it. It's necessary, and it's how you track your business and how you're performing. And then I would say the finance function, which everybody knows, more forward looking, FP&A, looking at, how do we make investments that are going to help us grow into the future? But then also at Dude Wipes, we have sales strategy, which is basically of our existing products, who do we sell what to? So we determine like the optimum mix to sell to like each channel and each retailer. Whereas my partner, Sean Riley, who I call the best butt wipe salesman in the world, he's out on the front lines with our sales folks, actually selling them and closing them, knocking on doors, building relationships with these retailers. We're helping them establish the story and figure it out. And then supply chain, we always say, we're a bunch of Chicago guys, and the joke around here is there's a lot of big alcohol in the Chicagoland area. And so they always say liquor to lips. We always say wipes to ass. And so in order to get those wipes to somebody's ass, you got to make sure you have enough of them. And when you're growing this much, I would say supply chain is kind of one of the biggest tasks that I've been focused on. And especially because we're creating a category. This is not like soap, like bar soap, where there's enough installed capacity in the United States to meet demand. We are physically putting shovels in the ground, bolting down net new machinery in order to meet demand. So right now, demand is outstripping capacity in the United States. And so that's kind of made all of those functions, the finance, sales strategy, and supply chain, very linked together. And right now, supply chain has dictated how fast we can grow. And then the fourth and final, which I think everybody is aware of is legal, falls into my realm. I think when we get to another stage, that's something that will kind of like a chief legal officer or a GC will take off my plate. But right now, um, we got to protect our ass. And so legal rolls up to me, and I use a lot of outside counsel and advice from a lot of smart people. So, but those are kind of like the four functions. And I think everybody thinks of it as kind of like the first one, finance and accounting, and they don't realize the other stuff that you have rolling up to it. And obviously we have a team of very smart people leading each one of those verticals. And so could not do it without them. And they're subsector experts within those.
Well, it's awesome because it sounds like, as you said, like I was when you first texted that, I was like, oh, that that's certainly different than I've seen other CFO roles. But given the company and life stage, as you get larger, some of them will become independent functions. But it does seem like you're kind of a CFO, COO hybrid type of a thing, right? Because and that makes total sense. And I was saying, fortunate for the team, the company, you're a co-founder. Otherwise, you have four roles that would normally be four paychecks. But it's all love and grins and upside because you guys are having so much fun. But in each of those roles, before we dive into the AI section, like I mean, you're describing functions that have a different set of business problems that are top of mind for you, I'm sure. They're kind of inherent, as you said, like, the FP&A function. I'm always like, stay out of jail. Yeah. That's kind of job number one with that. But then I'm sure there's like for each of them on finance and accounting, supply chain. I mean, I'm reminded of when I first started working with Keurig in 2011, they were like, the CapEx decision is the hardest one. Each line costs $5 million, takes 9 months to build out. How do I forecast demand so that I know if I'm over or under investing? And, they were kind of looking at me I was like, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you on this side of the S curve, you're better to be wrong early than to be wrong late. I can tell you that for sure. Right. But then sales strategy of, making sure you can fulfill that retailers at Sean's work hard to give them the green light and the thumbs up, they aren't pissed at you later on after the fact. Right. And then, legal, I'm sure. Well, actually, I don't even know. Like, you guys certainly push the edge on the marketing front. Like, I don't know what kind of legal problems that you're worried about with it, but like for each of those four areas, like, what's the business problem or the nightmares or the dreams that you're the most excited about? Just let's start there.
Yeah, I would say, on the legal side, that's easy. Just from like, a lot of it has to do with like contracts and making sure that like we own the IP and we're protected. We use a lot of third party contractors. We're a lean team. And so that's kind of how we built the business. We took, for the first 40, 50 million in revenue, it was just the co-founders running the business and leveraging third parties. And as we've scaled, we've moved away from them and brought people in-house to kind of help us build it. And so a lot of it's contracts and just making sure we own IP, like the boring stuff, as well as with our manufacturer. We have very big, important long-term supply agreements with them. So that's that. And then on the marketing side, we use a lot of influencers and making sure that people are saying the right things and not saying other things that we don't approve of, stay on message. Even though we are risky in terms of like what we say, it's more on the fun side. We just don't want somebody going out there and kind of like going on tangents that are like aligned with our brand equity, which is to, wet cleans better than dry, and so as long as you stay down that lane, you're all good. So
I'm sure there are stories, but
for sure, and having people take stuff down. So, but that's like the less glamorous side. And then on the supply chain, I would say, like you said, Eddie, like with your K cup example, like that is, I would say that's the scariest thing, like right now, because we're investing ahead of demand essentially, and just we are looking 3 years ahead. You were saying 9 months. It takes us 18 months from the time the check's cut to when it's actually producing at like a normalized run rate. So we're looking 3 years ahead and focusing like right now, like we're talking about we just finished up 2027. Now we're talking about 2028 and focusing on that. And, there's big numbers now. Like before it was 2x off of a small base. Now we're growing 50% per annum off of a much larger base. And there's a lot of machines and CapEx that goes into those numbers. And so just kind of locking arms and like understanding like, okay, this is what we're doing. Every year it surprises myself. Like, and that's where like being tied into supply chain and FP&A is like really important. And I think that's why we have a strategic advantage, is because I understand the plan and how it's rolling up to each customer and our major customers. And so I can see this demand. And I actually go to the big line reviews with Sean. I tag along with them. So like I'm in every Walmart and Target meeting and I can hear from the
which is
buyer's mouth.
atypical.
Yeah.
It's atypical.
Yep. And I can hear from the buyer's mouth like what their long-term strategy is. So it's not just this, salespeople. They're the bullish people on the planet. And thank God for that, because they're selling the dream. And I can see that interaction. And it really, really, like, every year I've been surprised at how much growth we have coming out of the same places. Like when I would have thought, 4 years ago, we'd be fully penetrated in that channel. And now when I look at it and we do these studies about like white space, some of our most penetrated channels are only 30% penetrated. And I would have told you 5 years ago, we would be tapped out, and we're only a third of the way there. And so I'd say that link between FP&A and supply chain and like having that visibility from my perspective and sales strategy on like what we're selling is a strategic advantage within Dude Wipes that like allows me to have the confidence to write those checks 3 years in advance, knowing that that demand is going to come. And this thing is not slowing down. I am more bullish on our business than I have ever been in the history of Dude Wipes. And that's saying something. We've been at this now for, since I know the company was founded in 2011, but we were working on it in 2010, so since 2010. So I have never been more bullish about the future growth than I am now than I was then. So it's a good position and purview.
But, and I would love to double click further, because what you're describing is forecasting at a high level for across different functions, right? FP&A, you seeing what the past has done. There is a forecasting element to it for sure. For, and the challenge with forecasting the slope and trajectory is relatively easy compared to forecasting timing. And timing is the hard part of the gig as you're describing it, because like, on the supply chain side in 18-month, that's one thing. The line reviews are, for the next, you tell me, like the next 12 months out. But then at some level, it becomes an interesting exercise of like, kind of like the one we did was like, hey, look, flushable clearly is nowhere near the full size of prize. We can talk about that. But then, between tariffs and the macro and, whatever, like, but I was going to say like, all the news about AI or in the GDP is like the economy would be flat if not for AI capex investments. But I actually now realize it's GPUs and flushable butt wipes. Like those are the two things where demand is way outstripping supply, and you got to invest further with it. But like, how do you actually, obviously you're classically trained, but I'm hearing a lot of gut and intuition coming into it. How do you merge those two in a way that makes you feel good about the NPV and the IRR of the investments that you're making with?
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with experience, just having, seen high growth businesses before in my prior job. Also, I would say building up the intuition confidence is what I like to call it, like talking to other founders that have been there. We had talked to some other folks on the supplement side where they invested and they bought up all of the capacity within their realm to give themselves a 5-year kind of runway when they were category creators within their segment. And so there's a lot of situations that are like that. And then also, like, I would say so there's that intuition. So talking to other people that have been in this situation, experience at my prior job, seeing other case studies where they've invested in this like ahead of the curve. And then also just my experience with Dude Wipes. I've continually been wrong on the downside, like underestimating the growth. And so now it's like that happens enough. You're just like, okay, I understand now where this curve is going to be. And I would say the beauty of our business model, which I think is underestimated, is is really the variable cost structure of Dude Wipes. So yes, CapEx is important, but I would say our biggest, cash need is working capital. And that kind of alleviates itself. So like if I am down wrong, like I guess too high, well, I can do the math to understand like there's going to be a big inflow in working capital and cash that I have tied up into the business that's going to allow us to reposition and, get through that time period. So like having experience navigating through some of those times, like, in 2022, Amazon did a massive destocking, and we were investing ahead of it. And so that was like one of those instances where we had to pull back on marketing spend and stuff for a period of time to kind of reposition. And so the business has been able to do that and navigate those uncharted territories. And I think that's also where another thing we're not a VC pump and dump story. We're a bootstrap company. So, and maybe this is an interesting story to tell readers. Like we tried, like when we were doing, like we went on Shark Tank, we got this investment from Mark Cuban. We thought we had made it. Like, this is awesome. We've got $300,000 in our bank account. Let's go raise more money. Dollar Shave Club was blowing up at the time. And so VC was starting to throw money at these CPG companies. Sean and I took like 20 to 30 VC meetings and we got rejected by every single one of them. And so we were like, what's going on? And the biggest rejection was like, you'll never get guys to use wipes. And we're like, that seems kind of dumb because we're guys and we're using wipes. So like, whatever. So we're like, we got to get profitable. And so in Q4 of 2016, we got profitable, our first quarter ever. And we've been profitable every year ever since. And so I just want to say, like, we've been a profit first company. And so that enables us to take big bets now, that you're
Yeah.
talking about is kind of risky. So,
Yeah. That's so important, Jeff, because the blessing in disguise of, and I'm sure you're much nicer than I think if Christopher was here, you'd be like, I'm sure you have a list of the VCs that have said no and where they are today. But anyway, but like the whole kind of, constraint of not being flush with capital forced you to be bootstrapped and, kind of get default alive on the runway perspective, which is great. Because like there's the obvious genius of the marketing and the brand and just the wipe being bigger, right? Is like, and all of that is you can see from the outside. What I don't think people fully appreciate is the business model that you've designed, and that there's real magic and secret sauce. What you said about, hey, you've levered the business to be a variable cost lever and not a fixed cost one. You co-manufacture your stuff. You're not building plants out just yet. You have a pretty lean team. I think I shared with you, like, the only company that has higher revenue per FTEs might be OnlyFans apparently, or whatever. And stuff like, it's you guys and them. And so like you've designed it to be pretty significantly conservative, despite being a very aggressive from the outward perspective on the marketing and front like that. And so like, how did you, and these are choices that you may revisit in the future, but when you say working capital is your biggest risk, but when you're a variable cost, structured business because you've kept it lean, probably one quarter of being wrong the one way, you flush it out in, no pun intended, very shortly, right? I mean, it's not like your risk profile is not one where you've tied up capital the wrong way for years. It's probably months or quarters. Is that a fair way to describe it?
yeah, I would say so, but I would say we are investing CapEx just given the demand that we're seeing within the marketplace. So we
Mm.
are having to put our own dollars in to support the growth over the next 5 years. So that's the nuance. How I think about it is like, we focus on EBITDA, but if I could make any button in the world for a CFO is I would say make free cash flow button. That is our North Star. I think EBITDA is the most overrated metric on the face of the planet. My job as a CFO is to make long-term investments to generate more free cash flow in the future. And so I only focus on EBITDA to have enough EBITDA so I have free cash flow at the end of my change in working capital, less CapEx equals zero. And that's where we're at today. We are, yeah. Yeah.
No, this is great. Let's go finance nerd on this stuff.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you share. I forget if it was Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett. EBIT does BS earnings is what he called it, right?
Yes.
And so it sounds like you have some strong opinions about this versus free cash flow. And so, like, talk more about that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Because EBITDA ignores DNA, which is a proxy for CapEx. And so to grow a business and be a category leader, a good business, you're going to need CapEx within the business model. SaaS might be a different category, but they have R&D, so, and that's captured in EBITDA. So maybe that's a little bit different. And so I think if R&D was CapEx, people would be focused on EBIT in the SaaS world. So yes, I'm very much the Warren Buffett type. EBIT would be a much better proxy if we're talking that, but like EBITDA does not encapsulate like what are like the needs of a company long term. And I would say understanding the swings of working capital is the hardest thing to do in CPG, especially high growth, because people assume you're able to just produce when I need product. No, because August and December are two spikes. So I have to start producing in April to meet back to school. And then immediately in September and October, where there's a little lull, I'm going full blown so I can meet the holiday demand. And so it's not, our cash flow is not this perfect linear curve, but our working capital is. And so it's a very different thing where it's a mismatch. And so that's why my goal at the end of the year is how do we maximize EBITDA to work it out to where free cash flow is zero. And so I'm investing in my business, giving Ryan, our CMO and co-founder, enough money to drive demand to where that whole EBITDA is enough to where I can cover my working capital and CapEx needs to have no change in free cash flow. That is my goal.
Perfect. Well, there are two things that come to mind. One is that at some point I had to take over as quote CFO because we didn't have a CFO of Category Pirates, and I told Christopher, like, "Oops, I forgot the free cash flow part of it," and then I'm like, "I don't think my annual spreadsheets work. I think I have to go down to monthly at least to understand what that." So that was kind of a rude awakening for me, as like clearly somebody who's been a spectator and not in the arena long enough. But then when Nielsen had acquired my old firm, the Cambridge Group, Dave Calhoun, who was a dark horse for the top job at GE, went to Blackstone, was CEO of Boeing until all the problems that happened with the 737s, whatnot. But he would say within Nielsen, it was like, show me a business that's generating too much free cash flow, and I'm not excited about it. I want one that is investing aggressively because they know that there's more upside ahead of that. Is that kind of the mindset when you say free cash flow is zero? Because like I think that'll be surprising to some folk around.
Yes, absolutely. That's the mindset. And that's how, when you ask the question about how much do you invest in CapEx or working capital or marketing, that's how we get to our answer. And so that's how we know that's the max we can grow in a certain year because our free cash flow at the end of the year is going to be around zero. And that's how I pace our growth. And so these investments, like right now, we can grow approximately, 50% per annum at zero cash flow, which is, when numbers are getting big, those are starting to get big numbers. And that's what we're targeting every year. And so that's kind of like the algorithm that we look for. And at some point, 10 years down the future, we will have a much bigger free cash flow number, but we're not at that today. And so, yeah, we can invest and grow as fast as we can at this current rate.
I see the meme of that. Who is that? I forget what country the guy was. The Turkey guy that's doing the shooting thing with none of the gear and like that. There's Jeff like demand will look like this and CapEx there, so free cash flow zero.
And it is not a coordinate. You're tweaking throughout the year, so it's not, everybody thinks like your plan is just a set it and forget it thing. And that is not the case. We are constantly updating our plan based on like what happened in January. Now we have a new rolling 12-month. Like on the supply side, we have a rolling 24-month. And so we're constantly updating that with new data, tweaking, and running from.
Jeff, I was going to say, I was going to pivot the conversation, but if you want to tie it off.
Yeah, I got two summaries and
Okay.
then we'll pivot. So one is for high growth companies or aspiring pirates like Jeff, Sean, and Ryan, get to EBITDA positive as quickly as possible. That's kind of one, right? So bootstrap your way there, and and constraints are good. Secondly, is I think so if that's stage one. So when you can get to a place where you're not needing to raise capital anymore, stage two would appear to be, how do I phrase this in a way? Invest ahead on demand of supply, such that though free cash flow is net zero. So you are aggressively investing. So you should not be generating, like, you got the profit, that's great. But if you're generating excess profits and you're not investing it back in, that tells you either the category is not healthy or you don't have the courage of your convictions. But don't get ahead of your skis, like, because you said two contradictory things that could be mistaken by folks. Of like, you said you've been wrong on the downside of every forecast. So one might assume, oh, so Jeff's going to correct and be up, but not in a way like it's a tug of war, but they're holding each other in balance of like, I want to be less wrong on the downside, but I still want free cash flow to be zero. Like both of those two things have to be true for the business to grow in a healthy clip and manner with that. So that's really important. And then stage three, in order to do that, you tell me, is you mentioned the easy button, right? Like make free cash flow button. Like I was wrong on either the working cap or I need to make more free cash flows, or how do I do that type of a thing? And so you're like, and how do you do that now? Like out of curiosity, like when you are, like, hypothetically speaking, if you're off and you're constantly adjusting, you're off too high, too low, and you need to kind of quote push make free cash flow the button, like how does that work? And then how does AI play into this?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing like we've been tackling is just on like payables, like collecting cash from like our retailers and customers. And that's one that we have started leveraging AI, is just like looking up, hiring a person to tackle that in terms of like cash collections and getting the money in the door faster. And then also leveraging AI for some of our larger customers that have more beefed up portals to kind of like match up invoices, match up chargebacks, understand what is legitimate and what isn't, and using kind of like agents to kind of automate all of that stuff. So all they are is sending out the emails or the contact person for the customer to like go get that. So the quicker you get paid, the more cash you generate. And so a lot of people don't realize that.
Let's stop there, because like I assume I remember you guys telling the story about like you had the PO from Kroger early on. You were all excited about that, right? So I imagine most aspiring dude wipers or folks like you who want to be you assume I got a PO, I'm going to get paid. Sounds like there's more complexity to that. Can you share some stories about that? Or
yeah, no, absolutely. It's tough. And like in the retailer's defense, they've got so many suppliers and vendors. And so there's a lot of like rules. And like right now, we get an order from a retailer via EDI. And so that basically talks to our system. Our system registers the order and then signals to our operations team to like send it out by like a specific date. But there's a lot of complicated stuff as it relates to the EDI transmission, and sometimes things go wrong. There's some things that are not correctly transmitted between the two companies. I am not an expert on the EDI stuff. We have a tech ops team that handles it, and they are wonderful. So our system will receive the PO, but not register it or send the relevant information back to the customer or the retailer to let us know to pay us on this date. And so there's a lot of small stuff like that that just gets mixed up, within like this process of all these hundreds of thousands of millions of POs being issued. So having people to kind of like identify it and look at receivables and like, or payables, like when they're getting late or past due, and tackling these issues is just a full-time job. And so having somebody or even AI agents that can like match up and read what we have on our end versus like what the standard sheet and the format should be, and recognizing, oh, there's an error here. It wasn't transmitted correctly. And so we need to rechange that and then resubmit the PO so it goes correctly in the retailer system. It's like something that I think AI will absolutely take over and help over the long.
can you give us a rough kind of like upside of like going from we weren't looking at it to I hired a person to look at it to and I don't know where you are on the agent spectrum of like we're automating and then using AI to take those people roles and, make them even more powerful, like cash conversion or free cash flow improves by X%, not looking at it, to hiring a person, to Y% to putting it, like, what would you tell people about that?
Yeah, I mean, from hiring somebody to not hiring somebody, it's been like, I would say a 40% improvement
Whoa.
in terms of and so a massive, massive improvement that's showing up in our P&L and our ability to generate cash for the company and then reinvest in the business and grow faster, drive sales to our customers. That's our goal. So
How much more upside do you think there is as you automate or use AI to do that?
I think we're pretty close. This person has done a tremendous job quarterbacking the process. Like they're the quarterback on our accounting team, but they're interacting with the sales team, with the operations teams. We just didn't have somebody quarterbacking that. And the operations team creating tech and all that kind of stuff and AI agents to help us evaluate that. So I think we're at a good spot, but I think what we will do as we scale, if we were to leave it how it was, like that issue would have just compounded. And so I'd say a lot of people are always looking for new things to generate new free cash flow. But sometimes you got to look like at your own house and see what can you fix, before looking outside of your house.
Plug your leaky buckets.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Payables, that's great. Super nitty gritty, super practical. What else is kind of on your mind about, like, make free cash flow button goes to what?
Yeah, I would say just on the supply chain side, I would say this is more in the future, but like leveraging AI to kind of like better understand our retailer ordering patterns to kind of get better and optimize working capital. So like I would say we're good on the pack size in terms of like we know how much we're going to sell, but in terms of the mix and optimizing the mix about what we're going to sell, we do get caught, kind of shorthanded still on that side. And I think that's one of the things that like AI is going to constantly be ingesting data and analyzing it to kind of continually tweak our demand plan. So it then feeds our plan. So then our mix is optimized and we have the right product we need for when our customers are going to order it. And I think that's something that impacts everybody. Walmart, all of our retailer customers, it's working capital for CPG and retail is really hard. I would say that's the hardest thing, in my opinion. So, yeah.
How do you, and so you must have different ways of measuring that. Obviously, there's gross change in working capital, but do you have like a due to analysis of like, hey, working capital is going the wrong way, and X% of it is because, as you said, the assortment and the mix was wrong, and that is because there was miscommunication between the order, or we weren't, or the retailer change the way that they order unexpectedly? Like, how does that work now? Like, you break it down that way?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is like what we're experiencing is one SKU, a new product innovation, is outperforming our very bullish expectations for it. And then, there is depending on where we're producing the product, 90 to 120 day lead time. So from the time we got the signal that this thing is taking off and this is a winner, we're crushing it out of the park, to the time we're able to place that new order and that new PO, there's a long time. It's generally like, a sales guy never wants to increase a forecast because then he's got to beat that number. And so that's one of those things that,
I remember a story. This is like 20 something years ago, maybe 23 years ago or so. We had cracked the code on, for Unilever, Ben and Jerry's, like Cherry Garcia, really, really important to you. And that, for whatever reason, you'll like this, Jeff, is that at the time, 30,000 grocery outlets and whatnot, there were 3,000 stores that drove half the SKUs of Cherry Garcia, and no one could figure out why. Like that's where I first started thinking maybe the super geo idea is a thing about it or whatever.
Yeah.
But that became a very low tech way of like, well, somebody walk the freezer aisle of these 3,000 stores and just make sure we're not out of stock there, so that we can get ahead of demand with that and stuff. But it is that level of nitty gritty detail that you need to get to. And it's incredibly hard because it's not, as you said, it's SKU level forecasting, which is exponentially harder than brand level forecasting and the like. So,
yeah,
with it. So
No,
yeah,
a great example of what you're just describing is like we noticed we were doing promotions at some of our food retailers, and we're noticing our lifts relative to our competitors whenever we're on promotion was like only 10 to 15%. So they weren't being productive. And we're like, why are our promotions not working? Well, we found out we're selling out by Wednesday. And so we got another 3, 4 days of empty shelves that are just sitting there. And so, that's what happens. Those are issues that you have when you're a high growth brand,
absolutely. Yeah.
that you don't see. So,
Well, I
yeah,
texted Sean the other day. I did a store check at the Walmart in Kona, and I was like, I wanted to find the store manager. I'm like, hey man, your shelf assortment here is way woefully too low. Like you
yeah,
need way more flushable, you need way more dude wipes, but that's a different story. So
for sure.
yeah. Anything else come to mind on this front? Like I'm sure we could spend hours on this topic, but like
No, what I'll say is Greg Brown, he's our SVP of Ops and Technology, has done a remarkable job in terms of creating this and like leaning in. And he was somebody that was, hey, this AI wave is coming at the forefront, and we need to lean into this, if nothing else, to allow our people to elevate and focus on more thinking oriented tasks and work on higher value work and eliminate some of this redundant stuff. We're in the situation where we're just swimming in data, and it's almost like we have too much data. And so there's a lot of noise, and it's using AI to allow us to gather that and digest it in a way that we can separate signal from noise and what's important to evaluate. And so Greg and his team has done a remarkable job. So like one of the examples that they did is they created AI agents to actually, our manufacturer lets us know when product is finished, and they have an AI agent called Diesel Dan that takes this report. It's an automated report that they send over and actually works with our freight broker to book trucks automatically and perfectly according to weight and maximize the volume. And books trucks, so fully automated. So the report just gets sent over to us in an email, and somebody initiates Diesel Dan to do it, and Diesel Dan books all of the trucks across like 3 counterparties, lets people know it's coming. And so they've done a tremendous job. And what that does is that allows us and our manufacturer to move inventory quicker, and then they have more space to actually go produce more. And so that was actually an issue back in the old days when we were first starting, is booking trucks and picking them up. Like inventory was piling up because we're producing so much and we weren't moving them quick enough. So that efficiency allows us to operate quicker.
that's great. Bottlenecks, working capital bottlenecks create working capital problems. That's for sure in
For
the
sure.
supply chain.
Yeah.
And like assume it wasn't like some vendor came to you and said, hey, we have this CRAP, AI agent. Like, so you must have built it
Yep.
internally.
Yes.
What was that process like? And I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So Greg leaning in, just like identified these opportunities. He's at the forefront of this stuff, and he's kept us, up to date on the importance and his vision for how this is going to transform not only like our company, but the entire landscape of the US. And so he's really done a great job to kind of like express that vision and the importance and how much it can save people. And so Sean, Ryan, and myself, our 3 partners, were just like, this is a no-brainer. This is something that we need to have culturally in our DNA to kind of like lean in and make investments to kind of like drive these efficiencies within our organization. And so this was actually, it feels like a very low risk investment for me. When I get the list of all of these things to invest in, and the marketing team has us very busy on that front in terms of some crazy stuff they're pitching our way. So establishing a crap team to automate things and make people's lives easier and more efficient and work on stuff that they prefer over like the tedious manual stuff, that just seems like a no-brainer, just from a cultural investment, and then from like an efficiency and productivity investment. Like that's good. Those are good dollars.
Well, it strikes me that you guys created the necessary conditions for all of this to happen. One is you hired Greg Browns, which is awesome, right? And then 2 is I just think the clarity of starting at the category level, wetter is better than dry, right? You have that, the forecast is like, we're nowhere near full penetration. And then you have kind of in your realm, Jeff, the make free cash flow button. Within that is optimize working capital. And then within that is, I think, Greg's aha of we are swimming in data, and drowning in data could create bottlenecks in the supply chain, building up inventory, tying up for working capital, which when Jeff presses the free cash flow button makes him angry, it doesn't work out that way, right? So like, therefore, you need, what is it? Cognition, reasoning, automation platform. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Right. You need all of that, right? And then you go, but like, because I think about when, other folks like me included, when we've chosen AI initiatives, not having that clarity of what is the business outcome I want, what is the problem that I'm solving for, and what are the constraints, can lead you to waste a lot of money with that. And so, I mean, I think you guys, kudos to you all for creating the clarity and the conditions to be able to build that capability internally. And that, like, as I think about your crap in Diesel Dan, like, who knows, that it's entirely reasonable that that's an AWS business. Like, I just have to imagine somebody else could get value out of that as well too, but not to complicate the things that you need to invest in. But SKU, mix assortment, demand planning, SKU wrap. These are the, things that, are major nightmares of any major CPG player, as you said. So it's physical, ain't digital. There are real problems that you got to deal with and stuff.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. I'm almost jealous of my SaaS friends,
Yeah, 100%. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover off on the AI agent front that we maybe, I don't know if it's early enough that you can share on the Dude Wipes front, or where do you see things going that you would be excited about? Like, I think about supply chain, finance and accounting. I mean, obviously there's going to be upside there, sales strategy and legal. Like, what are you most excited about? Or if I were to say, here's the APB for, vendors to create Jeff's wish list, what would it look like?
Yeah, I would say, on the sales strategy side in particular, and you touched on it a little bit, just like ingesting all of our data, our retail data, panel data, and then optimizing mix by channel based on that data. I think that is something that's very long and tedious, and a lot of analysis that goes into that is very formulaic. And I think AI can definitely improve that. On the supply chain side, I know we talked a little bit from a demand planning perspective, understanding the mix and ordering the right amount of the right type of product. And then legal, I think that is one of the areas that it's just going to get totally revolutionized. Because I think 70 to 80% of the work is you can just automate that. You can have an AI agent that can basically update any contract any vendor sends you and get you, hey, here's our form things, like our must-haves that we have within our form. Like, it's got to be legal jurisdiction. It's be the state of Delaware, Illinois, automatically update. And so you can get a markup that's like 70 to 80% there. So, your outside counsel is only focusing on the 20% that actually does matter. So I feel like legal is one of those areas that's going to get a ton of operating leverage from AI.
So someone needs to create a legal Larry to help you optimize contracts.
For sure.
And then,
yes. Yeah.
SKU Steve or whatever we need to do on the retailer front there. No, that's incredible. Like, I mean, Jeff, like the legal front is super exciting, as you said, like, and, my sense is that it should actually, there is a scenario where it could diminish the revenue, the total category of the legal profession. I actually think it should free up people to do more high value work for sure. Right. And so, because there's no doubt that as you guys have seen success, there have been people ripping you guys off and coming after you. Right. So, and at some level, Dude Wipes is a wipes company, but I do think of you as an IP company as well. Right. I mean, there's stuff that you guys do, Diesel Dan and crap, all of Ryan's stuff, there's the way in which you, even from a culture perspective, kind of, the whole, if you ain't first, you're last, like all of that stuff, like there's aspects of on the category design side of like, you've created the product certainly on the category, but the company, I think there's a lot of innovation that you guys have created that is not well understood. And maybe because it's normal for you guys, like just how rare it is to see in any other business side of it. So there's a lot of stuff that, it's what's kind of wild for me to think about is like, you guys will continue to grow exponentially. But, whether it's crap and Diesel Dan or the other things that, because of the constraints and conditions you've created, will force AI and agents to come about because you're being, there's Jeff with his crown and his scepter and his make free cash flow button. And, stuff's going to have to emerge as a result of that.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I'd say the person coming to you has credibility. So like Greg Brown has established a ton of credibility within our organization, and he's not a big spender. So I know Greg is like, prices everything to the penny. So, credibility from his perspective was a big thing. But also I would just say like, it just has to align with the overall strategy of the company. And what we're trying to do is be as efficient as possible and grow the category. And so now every single wild idea that like Ryan and team, like they bring us, like I just look through it with the filters, like, does it align with our brand equity and what we're trying to build? And if it does, and it's within the budget and like we're free cash flow, it's not taking the free cash flow to zero, below zero. I mean, you got to lean in there. And so that was like, that's our famous Tyrone Woodley, where I was against the $10,000 spent. I will say that was like 60% of our marketing budget or something like that for that year. So it was 2013. I think if Ryan was to spend 60% of our marketing budget on one thing, I might have something to say about it. Be a little nervous still, even to this day. But yeah, it's just credibility within the organization, but also does it align with what you're trying to do? And like the ideas that Greg is pitching me on these things, these are like, hey, this is how many thousands of hours this is going to save our team. That seems like a no-brainer investment to me. So yeah,
super helpful. And a good reminder of like, I'm sure that the three of you, it's hard to imagine a better trio, but each of you brings such unique gifts to the table that complement each other. And that's great. And, having a Ryan push you on, let's spend 60%, and you saying, maybe I'll give you one time in a career that we can do this. And they're like, but it's not a going forward thing is incredibly special. So congrats to you, man. And you and the other guys and the whole team there. It's super exciting. Congrats on the TSG investment that I am certain they were thrilled that you were there. They're like, oh, someone who speaks our language, and we know he's going to keep his eye on free cash flow, and that makes everybody comfortable with that. So congrats on that. And I'll tell you, man, from what we can see, you guys are nowhere close to being done. So super excited and grateful for you coming on.
No, we're super excited about the future ahead, and thank you very much for having me. So it was awesome.